It begins with a spark so intoxicating that it doesn't feel human. It feels cosmic, like destiny carved your name into another soul's ribcage, and finally, you've found the one who completes the unfinished melody of your life. When you meet a narcissist, the attraction isn't ordinary. It's magnetic, dangerous, and consuming. They don't just touch your body, they touch your existence, making you feel like you've stepped into the realm of the divine. Every look, every word, every moment seems engineered to make you feel chosen. You're not falling in love, you're surrendering to worship. In the beginning, their attention feels sacred. It's as though they've studied the architecture of your soul and built themselves perfectly around your every need. They mirror your desires, echo your dreams, and for a brief time, you feel seen more completely than ever before. It's a high unlike any drug, a divine intoxication where boundaries blur, logic fades, and your body becomes a temple to their approval. The chemistry is undeniable, but it's not just chemistry, it's control disguised as connection. Narcissists understand desire better than most because they study it like a weapon. They sense your hunger for love, validation, or passion, and they reflect it back with precision. They don't just seduce, they orchestrate. And in that orchestration, you become both the instrument and the melody, playing the tune they conduct. The physical connection becomes their stage, an arena where dominance, admiration, and illusion blend seamlessly. You are not merely desired, you're possessed. Over time, what felt like worship becomes ritual. You find yourself craving their approval, adjusting your tone, your dress, even your silence to maintain their attention. Every moment of affection feels like grace, every withdrawal like punishment, and that's how control takes root, not through force, but through dependency. You begin to equate love with chaos, passion with pain, and intimacy with submission. You don't realize that the pedestal they placed you on was always meant to tilt. As the relationship deepens, the energy shifts. The godlike attention you once received begins to fade. Where once there was fascination, now there's criticism. Where once there was worship, now there's warfare. You start to chase the ghost of that initial high, desperate to resurrect the version of them who made you feel divine. But that version never truly existed. It was an illusion, a crafted persona designed to ensnare your devotion. And the more you give, the less remains of you. The seduction of control thrives in that imbalance. The narcissist doesn't crave love, they crave power. Your adoration becomes their fuel, your confusion their validation. They break you down with subtle precision, gaslighting, guilt, comparison, until you begin to doubt your own reality. You question your instincts, your worth, even your sanity. And yet, part of you still believes that if you just love them harder, if you become more patient, more forgiving, more perfect, the heaven you once tasted might return. But that heaven was never built on truth, it was built on your longing. Narcissists don't love, they consume. They feed on emotional intensity, whether it's pleasure or pain, because both remind them of their power. Sex becomes a battlefield where they assert dominance and extract validation. It's not an exchange, it's a performance. You leave those encounters feeling simultaneously desired and depleted, like a vessel emptied of its purpose. The intimacy that once bonded you now binds you. And yet, to outsiders, it looks flawless. They see the charm, the charisma, the chemistry, and they envy what appears to be a passionate connection. But behind closed doors, it's a different story, a quiet erosion of spirit masked by the appearance of perfection. The narcissist thrives on perception. They craft an image that keeps you silent, because who would believe the story of someone who seemed so devoted, so divine? Eventually, the body starts to reflect what the soul already knows. The tension builds, the joy fades, and you begin to live in a constant state of emotional withdrawal. The pleasure that once felt transcendent becomes transactional. Every touch feels calculated, every word rehearsed. The illusion begins to crack, and for the first time you see the truth. The love you thought was mutual was merely manipulation wearing a mask of desire. When you finally begin to pull away, it feels like spiritual death. You're not just losing a partner, You're losing the version of yourself that believed in the fantasy. The separation becomes an exorcism. You grieve the moments that felt real, even if they were fabricated. You mourn the connection, even if it was parasitic. Because to you, it wasn't just sex or love. It was identity. You had built your emotional ecosystem around their validation, and now you must learn to breathe without it. But somewhere in that devastation lies the beginning of awakening. As the fog lifts, you start to see how the seduction was never about love. It was about control. The narcissist never wanted your partnership. They wanted your submission. And now, stripped of their influence, you begin to rediscover the power you unknowingly surrendered. The parts of you that were silenced begin to speak again. The mind that was once consumed by doubt starts to question not your worth, but their illusion. It's in that questioning that the healing begins. You start to understand that the divine feeling you once associated with them was never truly theirs to give. It was yours all along, the reflection of your capacity to feel deeply, to love fiercely, to believe fully. They merely mirrored it back until you mistook your own light for theirs. The seduction worked because it spoke to your longing, not your weakness. You were not naive, you were human. Life after such a relationship is not simple. There are echoes that remain, memories that sneak into your quiet moments, touches that haunt your dreams, words that replay like broken hymns. You might find yourself drawn back to the pattern, craving the very thing that wounded you. But each time you awaken a little faster. Each time you recognize the signs a little sooner, and each time you step closer to reclaiming the sovereignty that was once stolen through seduction. To live again after a narcissist is to rebuild your relationship with power not theirs, but your own. It's to realize that true intimacy cannot coexist with control, that love does not demand worship, it invites presence, that passion should elevate, not consume. You begin to understand that what felt like heaven was simply the illusion of being seen through someone else's projection. But when you meet yourself again, when you rediscover your truth, you see that the divine never left you. It was buried beneath the noise, waiting for the silence after the storm, and in that silence, something sacred stirs. The same intensity that once bound you becomes the energy that frees you. The fire that once burned you now illuminates the path forward. You start to feel desire again, but this time it's grounded, not dependent. This time it's for life itself. The seduction of control fades, replaced by the authenticity of connection, and you finally understand that heaven was never in their arms. It was always within your own. It begins like a dream too vivid to be questioned, a connection so powerful it feels preordained, almost supernatural. When you meet a narcissist, you don't fall in love, you're consumed by it. Every glance, every touch, every word seems designed to awaken something deep inside you. They study you from the first moment, mirroring your emotions, reflecting your desires, constructing a version of love so perfect that it feels like destiny. What you don't realize is that this isn't love at all, it's architecture. Every gesture, every expression, every promise is carefully engineered to pull you into a reality they control. The illusion begins with intensity. Narcissists don't enter lives quietly. They arrive like a storm, sweeping away doubt and logic in the chaos of connection. They don't just want your attention. They demand it, thrive on it, feed from it. Their energy is magnetic, their confidence intoxicating. They seem to know who they are, what they want, and exactly how to make you feel special. In their presence, you feel more alive than ever before. That aliveness is what hooks you because it's not just emotional, it's chemical. The brain responds to their affection like a drug, flooding your body with dopamine, oxytocin, and adrenaline. The result is euphoria, and that euphoria becomes the trap. Over time, you start to confuse intensity with intimacy. Their passion feels like proof of love. Their attention feels like validation. You start to believe that this is what love is supposed to feel like. Dangerous, thrilling, all-consuming. But that belief is the illusion's foundation. The narcissist understands that if they can make you addicted to the highs, you'll tolerate the lows. And soon the cycle begins. The warmth that once wrapped around you like sunlight turns cold. The attention you once craved disappears without warning. You're left chasing what you once had, believing you did something to lose it. That's the power dynamic they build. Your desire for their love becomes their control over your life. The illusion grows stronger as you invest more of yourself. You share your dreams, your pain, your fears. And they use that vulnerability not to bond, but to bind. They listen not to understand, but to learn how to manipulate. They'll remember your insecurities and weaponize them later. They'll use your empathy as a leash, pulling you back every time you try to walk away. And because their cruelty is interwoven with moments of tenderness, you stay, you rationalize. You convince yourself that no one else has ever made you feel this much, and that must mean something. You don't see that they've turned your own emotions into their tool. The relationship becomes a performance, one where the narcissist directs, and you, unknowingly, play the supporting role. They thrive on the reaction, on your devotion, on the way your eyes still search for their approval even after they've hurt you. That reaction is their energy source. It feeds their fragile ego, validating the illusion of superiority they need to survive. They can't sustain their inflated self-image without an audience, and so they build their world around those who will worship, chase, and forgive. You become their reflection, and through you, they see the God they believe themselves to be. Life with a narcissist is a series of contradictions. You feel both adored and invisible, cherished and discarded, desired and destroyed. You find yourself explaining, defending, apologizing for things you never did. You start to believe that if you can just be better, more patient, more loving, less reactive, their affection will return. But the truth is, it never left by accident. It was withdrawn deliberately because power is addictive and control is their currency. They know exactly how much love to give and how much to take away to keep you dependent. This cycle seeps into every part of your existence. Your confidence erodes, your sense of reality bends. You stop trusting your instincts because they've been systematically rewritten. What once felt like abuse now feels like love. What once felt like manipulation now feels like connection. The illusion becomes so complete that you can no longer distinguish between passion and punishment. That's when they've won, not because they broke you, but because they convinced you to question your own reflection. The tragedy is that the narcissist's illusion isn't confined to romantic relationships. It spills into friendships, workplaces, families. They create worlds where admiration replaces authenticity, where charm conceals control. In every arena, the game is the same. They build an illusion of greatness so convincing that others willingly give them power. And behind every illusion is the same emptiness, the same hunger for validation that can never be satisfied. They need others to believe in them because they cannot believe in themselves. To live under their spell is to exist in a constant state of hope and confusion. You wait for the return of the person you first met, the one who saw you, cherished you, adored you. But that person was never real. They were a reflection of your own longing, a mask worn to gain your trust. And when the mask slips, when the cruelty becomes undeniable, you're left not just mourning the relationship, but mourning the illusion itself. It's a grief unlike any other, because you're grieving something that never truly existed. When the illusion finally collapses, it's both devastating and liberating. You begin to see how deeply the manipulation ran, how your kindness was used as leverage, your compassion as a weapon. You see how their love was never given freely but traded for control. And slowly, you begin to understand that the power they seemed to hold over you was never truly theirs. It was yours, surrendered piece by piece through trust, through devotion, through the belief that love could heal what was always meant to consume. The recovery is not instant. There are moments when you still crave their attention, even knowing what it cost you. That's the residue of addiction. You miss the illusion more than the person, the fantasy more than the reality. But with time, the spell weakens. You start to see the beauty in peace, the strength in solitude, the holiness in ordinary love. You begin to rebuild your sense of self, not as a reaction to their approval, but as a declaration of your own worth. And then, something remarkable happens. You no longer chase intensity. You crave authenticity. You begin to recognize real passion as something steady, not chaotic. You learn that love is not meant to take your breath away, but to help you breathe deeper. You stop mistaking pain for proof and realize that true connection doesn't demand your destruction. The narcissist taught you that passion could be weaponized. Life teaches you that passion, in its purest form, is creation, not control. In the end, the illusion that once enslaved you becomes your greatest teacher. It forces you to confront your own longing, to understand why the fantasy felt so real, to see how easily love can turn into worship when you forget your own divinity. Narcissists turn passion into power because they know how deeply people crave to be seen. But once you learn to see yourself fully, truthfully, without their reflection, you take back the power they borrowed. The illusion dissolves, and what remains is something far stronger than the high they once gave you, its clarity and its freedom. It doesn't happen all at once. It begins in small, almost imperceptible ways. A word here, a silence there. A shift so subtle you can't pinpoint when you started disappearing. When you fall in love with a narcissist, it feels like the most powerful force you've ever known. Their presence fills every corner of your world, and before long, you start to mold yourself around them. You become softer in the places they find too sharp, quieter where they demand peace, louder when they crave attention. You adjust, compromise, adapt. You convince yourself it's love. What you don't realize is that each adjustment, each tiny sacrifice, is the beginning of erosion. In the early stages, it doesn't feel like loss. It feels like connection. You want to please them, to make them happy, to be the person who finally understands them. They make you believe that you're their mirror, the only one who truly gets them. And in return, you receive an intoxicating level of attention, passion, and validation. They worship your strengths, celebrate your uniqueness, and promise a love unlike any other. It's overwhelming in the best and worst ways. Because what you're actually falling into isn't love, it's possession. They're not seeing you, they're absorbing you. The narcissist thrives on control masked as intimacy. They make you feel special for being chosen, but what's really happening is a quiet colonization of your mind. You begin to share your thoughts, your memories, your dreams, and they start to reshape them, ever so slightly. They question your perceptions, twist your intentions, and reframe your emotions. You begin to second, guess yourself, unsure whether your reactions are valid or exaggerated. And with every self-doubt, a piece of your identity fades into their shadow. At first, you fight to keep balance. You tell yourself that love requires compromise, that every relationship has challenges. You forgive the moments of cruelty, rationalize the manipulation, excuse the distance. You start using their pain as justification for their behavior, believing that if you just love them harder, they'll change. You tell yourself that your patience is strength, that your loyalty is love, but love, when weaponized by a narcissist, becomes self-sacrifice in disguise, and as you continue giving, they continue taking. The erosion deepens when you begin to lose your reflection. Your choices become theirs, your opinions start to blur. You hesitate to speak your mind because you know it will be turned against you. You stop expressing needs because they'll be labeled as selfish. You start wearing emotional armor so thick that you forget what it feels like to be open. Their moods dictate your day, their silence dictates your worth. You wake up every morning trying to decode their behavior, wondering if today you'll be loved or punished. And the cruelest part is, you still think this is love, because the highs are so powerful that they erase the lows. When they pull you close, whisper affection, or show you rare moments of tenderness, it feels like redemption. It feels like you've earned their approval again. You mistake relief for connection, and before you know it, your entire sense of identity revolves around keeping them pleased. You stop living for yourself and start surviving for them. Friends notice the change before you do. They see the dimming of your spark, the hesitation in your laughter, the way you defend the indefensible. They try to warn you, but you can't hear it. You're addicted to the illusion, convinced that no one else could understand what you share. The narcissist ensures this by isolating you further, subtly undermining your relationships, planting seeds of doubt about everyone who might pull you away. Soon, their voice becomes the only one that matters. In that silence, you start to lose the language of your own soul. You forget what you once loved, what you once dreamed, what once made you feel alive. The things that used to define you, your passions, your creativity, your independence, begin to feel meaningless. You find yourself apologizing for existing, shrinking in spaces where you once stood tall. You become a version of yourself shaped entirely by their expectations, their moods, their desires, and the more you lose yourself, the more dependent you become on them to tell you who you are. The body starts to carry the weight of what the mind refuses to see. The tension in your shoulders, the heaviness in your chest, the exhaustion that never seems to fade, it's the physical manifestation of suppression. You're living in constant emotional defense, anticipating every shift in their tone, trying to stay one step ahead of their disapproval. You call it love, but your nervous system calls it survival, and still, part of you clings to hope. Because there are moments, brief, disarming moments, when they return to that person you first met, the one who made you feel extraordinary. They remind you of your connection, tell you how much you mean to them, and for a while the fog lifts. You convince yourself that maybe things are getting better, that maybe the worst is behind you. But soon enough, the cycle begins again. And every time it does, you lose another piece of yourself trying to hold on. When the breaking point finally comes, it's rarely dramatic. It's quiet. It's the day you realize you no longer recognize the person staring back at you in the mirror. It's the moment when you can no longer remember what it felt like to laugh without permission, to speak without fear. It's when you understand that love was never supposed to cost you your identity. You don't leave because you stop loving them. You leave because you finally remember how to love yourself. But the aftermath is not simple. You step out of the relationship feeling hollow, disoriented, unsure of who you are without them. You've spent so long defining yourself through their perception that rediscovering your individuality feels foreign. You try to make simple choices, what to wear, what to eat, where to go, and you freeze. Because for so long, every decision was filtered through the question, what will they think? You're free, but freedom feels terrifying when you've forgotten how to exist independently. The healing process is a slow unlearning. You start piecing yourself back together, not from memory, but from truth. You learn to sit in silence without seeking validation. You learn to trust your own intuition, to rebuild confidence in your perceptions. You rediscover forgotten passions, revive neglected dreams, and reintroduce yourself to the world, not as who you were with them, but as who you are now. Each step feels like reclaiming territory that was stolen from you, inch by inch, breath by breath. The hardest part is forgiving yourself, not for loving them, but for losing yourself in the process. It's realizing that the erosion wasn't weakness, it was survival. You did what you needed to do to keep peace, to keep love, to keep hope alive. But once you understand that true love doesn't demand the death of self, you stop romanticizing the pain. You begin to see that love is not supposed to silence you. It's supposed to amplify you. In time, your reflection changes again. The light returns to your eyes, your laughter becomes real, your voice steady. You learn to set boundaries, to say no without guilt, to love without surrendering yourself completely. You start to see that the parts of you they tried to destroy were the very parts that made you powerful. The erosion was temporary. The foundation was never gone. It was waiting, buried under layers of manipulation, ready to rise again. And as you continue forward, you begin to understand that losing yourself was not the end of your story. It was the beginning of remembering who you've always been. Because the self, no matter how deeply buried, never truly disappears. It waits in the quiet, beneath the noise of someone else's control, waiting for the day you finally choose to listen again. There comes a moment after the chaos when the silence feels unbearable. The noise of the narcissist's world, once deafening with passion, arguments, laughter, and illusion, suddenly fades, leaving you standing in a kind of spiritual quiet. At first, it feels like loss. You miss the intensity, the adrenaline, the constant motion. You miss the very thing that broke you because without it, life feels colorless. But beneath that emptiness, something sacred is beginning to stir. This is the divine reckoning. The moment when the soul, long silenced by manipulation, begins to whisper again. When the relationship ends, it rarely feels like liberation. It feels like withdrawal. The body aches, the heart trembles, and the mind replays every memory on an endless loop, trying to make sense of what was real. The narcissist's presence was like a drug, flooding you with chemicals that made love feel like transcendence and pain feel like proof. Now, stripped of that addiction, you find yourself staring into a void. It is not just the absence of them, it's the absence of who you became while with them. You're forced to confront the version of yourself that surrendered so much in the name of love, and it's not an easy reckoning. In the beginning, you resist it. You try to fill the silence, distract the loneliness, chase closure that never comes. You might reach out, hoping for answers, only to find manipulation waiting on the other end. The narcissist will sense your longing and use it as an invitation. They'll remind you of the good times, play on your empathy, promise change, but this time, something inside you hesitates. You start to see the pattern not as love, but as control. The awakening doesn't happen all at once. It unfolds slowly, like dawn breaking after a long, relentless night. As the light begins to seep through, you start noticing things you once ignored. You remember how often you silenced your intuition to keep the peace, how you accepted apologies without accountability, how you mistook chaos for passion and isolation for devotion. The clarity is painful because it reveals how deeply you were conditioned to believe that love required suffering. You start to see that the relationship was never about partnership, it was about power, and in that realization, the illusion begins to crumble. This stage is raw. The reckoning doesn't come dressed as peace, it comes as grief. You grieve not just the person you lost, but the version of yourself that existed before them. The one who believed in love without fear, who trusted easily, who saw beauty in vulnerability. The narcissist took that innocence and turned it into a weapon. They taught you to equate love with control, compassion with weakness, loyalty with self-erasure. Now, as you begin to awaken, you must unlearn it all. It's during this stage that the divine enters quietly, not as comfort, but as confrontation. You start to understand that this experience was not simply tragedy, it was transformation. Pain becomes a kind of teacher, revealing the cracks in your foundation that allowed someone else to build their empire inside you. You begin to see that the healing process is not about returning to who you were before, but about becoming someone wiser, stronger, more aligned with truth. You start to reclaim your energy in small, deliberate ways. You stop explaining your pain to those who cannot understand it. You set boundaries where there once were none. You start saying no, not out of bitterness, but out of self-respect. Each act of defiance against the old pattern feels like a prayer. The same intensity that once bound you to the narcissist now fuels your freedom. You begin to channel the passion that was once manipulated into creation, expression, and growth. The storm that broke you becomes the wind beneath your rebirth. But awakening is not a straight line. There are moments when you falter, days when nostalgia tricks you into missing the illusion. You scroll through old photos, revisit memories, and wonder if maybe you overreacted. The narcissist's charm lingers like a ghost, whispering promises that never came true. In those moments, you must remind yourself that the high was not love. It was the performance of love. The very thing you miss is the fantasy that kept you captive. And each time you resist returning to it, you strengthen the part of you that remembers the truth. As the months pass, you begin to feel your spirit recalibrate. The nervous system that once lived in constant alert begins to relax. You start to laugh again, not as a performance, but from a place of authenticity. You begin to rediscover the simple joys that once seemed insignificant: music, solitude, sunlight, stillness. You realize that peace, though unfamiliar, is far more powerful than passion born from control. The divine reckoning is this realization that what you thought was love was actually your own reflection. Your capacity for empathy, depth, and faith mirrored back through someone incapable of truly giving it. Life after the narcissistic high is quieter, but within that quiet is power. You begin to notice how your perception of love changes. You no longer crave intensity, you crave safety. You no longer seek validation, you seek understanding. You no longer chase the high, you honor the steady rhythm of self-respect. The awakening transforms your standards, your boundaries, and most of all, your self-worth. You begin to understand that real love does not demand that you shrink. It doesn't silence you. It doesn't use your heart as a stage for someone else's performance. This is where the divine enters fully, not as religion, but as revelation. You begin to see the spiritual architecture behind the experience. The narcissist's destruction forced you inward, to confront the parts of yourself that believed love had to be earned, proved, or endured. In healing, you start to build a relationship with yourself that feels sacred. You learn to listen to your intuition like a compass, to honor your emotions as messages rather than weaknesses. You stop needing others to define your worth because you've met the version of yourself who survived the storm. And that version is holy. The reckoning also changes how you see others. You start to recognize patterns in people, the way manipulation hides behind charm, how ego masks as confidence. You no longer romanticize potential. You see behavior for what it is. You realize that empathy without boundaries is self-destruction, and forgiveness without change is self-betrayal. What once drew you in now warns you to walk away. You have become your own protector, not out of fear, but out of wisdom. There's a moment, often unexpected, when you feel gratitude for what you went through. It's not because it was right or fair, it's because it awakened you to your own divinity. You realize that surviving that kind of love requires a transformation that ordinary relationships never provoke. The same person who once broke you inadvertently revealed your capacity to rebuild. You learn that heartbreak in its purest form is not just emotional, it's alchemical. It burns away illusions until only truth remains. And that truth is simple yet profound. You were never incomplete. The narcissist did not complete you, they distracted you from yourself. The love you sought in them was a reflection of the love that was waiting to be rediscovered within you. The divine reckoning is not just about healing from another. It's about coming home to your own soul. It's about realizing that the most powerful high you can ever experience is not through another person's validation, but through your own alignment with truth. In this awakening, life begins to look different. The chaos that once thrilled you now feels intolerable. The peace that once felt empty now feels like sanctuary. You start to attract people who meet you where you are, not as saviors, but as equals. The world feels softer, slower, more intentional, and in that quiet clarity, you realize that the reckoning was never punishment, it was grace. The divine had to break the illusion so you could see your own light again. In the aftermath of a narcissistic relationship, the world feels scorched. The air around you is heavy, the silence unfamiliar, and every thought carries the scent of smoke from the fire that once burned so brightly. You walk through the ruins of what used to be your love story, realizing that what you thought was passion was often destruction disguised as devotion. The wreckage isn't just emotional, it's spiritual. It leaves behind an ache that seeps into every corner of your being, a hollow space where once there was intensity, chaos, and control. What follows is the slow, painful, and extraordinary journey from hellfire to healing, a return not to who you were, but to who you truly are beneath the ashes. The beginning of healing feels impossible because you've lived so long in survival mode. The narcissist's world was a constant storm, and your body learned to brace for impact every day. When that storm finally ends, you expect peace to feel soothing. But instead, it feels like emptiness. You're left with the echoes of what once was, the arguments, the apologies, the cycles of love and rejection that became your normal. There's no closure because narcissists don't end stories. They abandon them when they've drained what they came for. You're left to finish the story alone, piecing together fragments of truth from years of illusion. In the early stages, the mind becomes its own battlefield. You question everything, your choices, your memories, your worth. You replay conversations in your head, trying to understand when the shift happened, when love turned into something that devoured you. This stage feels like wandering through a maze without a map. Every turn leads to another wall of confusion, and the instinct is to blame yourself. You wonder if you were too forgiving, too emotional, too needy. But healing begins the moment you stop asking what was wrong with you and start asking what happened to you. That question changes everything. As the fog begins to lift, you start to see how manipulation reshaped your entire sense of reality. You see how you were conditioned to doubt your instincts, to equate love with sacrifice, and to confuse chaos with connection. That awareness hurts. It burns like the truth often does, but it also purifies. You start to understand that surviving the narcissist wasn't weakness. It was evidence of your capacity to love deeply, to endure profoundly, and to hope even in darkness. The pain becomes your proof of humanity, not your shame. From there, the journey inward begins. Healing after hellfire isn't about revenge or even forgiveness. At first, it's about reclamation. It's about gathering the pieces of yourself scattered across years of emotional warfare. You start to reclaim your time, your choices, your voice. You rediscover what it feels like to make decisions without fear, to speak without walking on eggshells. Small acts of independence, buying something you like, taking a walk alone, saying no without guilt, become sacred rituals of rebirth. Each one declares, I exist outside of their shadow, but healing isn't linear. Some days you feel strong and certain, others you spiral back into old memories. You might find yourself missing the very person who caused the pain. That's not weakness, it's trauma bonding. The narcissist conditioned your nervous system to link love with pain, pleasure with punishment. Breaking that bond takes time. It's not just emotional healing, it's biological rewiring. Every time you choose peace over chaos, every time you resist the urge to reach back out, you're retraining your brain to recognize safety as love again. The sacred part of healing emerges in solitude. It's in the moments when you stop trying to fill the silence and start listening to it. Within that silence, you begin to hear your own voice again, the one that was silenced by control, dismissed by manipulation, overshadowed by someone else's ego. It speaks softly at first, uncertain, hesitant, but with time it grows louder, clearer, stronger. That voice is your truth returning home. You begin to realize that what was destroyed was never your soul. It was only the illusion built around it. The narcissist's presence stripped away everything superficial. Your need to be liked, your reliance on validation, your belief that love must be earned. What remains is something raw, pure, and powerful. The suffering becomes sacred, not because it was deserved, but because it awakens you to the truth of who you are. You start to see yourself not as broken, but as rebuilt, not as a victim, but as someone reborn through fire. As you continue to heal, you start to experience a shift in perspective. You no longer crave the intensity that once defined love. You begin to value gentleness, consistency, and respect. The quiet relationships that once seemed boring now feel divine. You learn that love isn't supposed to feel like survival, it's supposed to feel like sanctuary. You start to nurture yourself in ways that no one ever did. You give yourself the empathy you once reserved for others, the patience you once wasted on apologies, the kindness you once begged for. That is the essence of reclaiming the sacred within, learning to love yourself in the way the world failed to. There's a spiritual dimension to this kind of recovery. It's not about religion, it's about realignment. When you were with a narcissist, your energy was constantly hijacked, your boundaries blurred, your spirit drained. Healing means calling that energy back, piece by piece. You begin to cleanse your space, your thoughts, your connections. You stop entertaining conversations that drain you. Stop justifying people who confuse you. Stop accepting half. Love as if it's the best you can do. The more you protect your energy, the more peace you attract. It's as if the universe begins to mirror your newfound boundaries, bringing harmony where chaos once lived. At some point, you look back and realize that the fire that once burned you also forged you. You've become sharper, wiser, more discerning. You no longer ignore red flags, you read them like sacred texts. You recognize manipulation not as flattery, but as danger. You no longer mistake attention for affection. You learn that love isn't something you lose. It's something you reclaim, because it was never theirs to begin with. They only reflected your capacity to love. They never created it. From hellfire to healing is a transformation that strips you of illusions and rebuilds you with truth. You stop seeking external validation because you've seen what it costs. You stop romanticizing suffering because you've learned the difference between growth and destruction. You start to see yourself as both the survivor and the healer, the wounded and the divine. And slowly, the scars that once made you feel ashamed begin to look like scripture, testaments of endurance, strength, and awakening. Eventually, peace stops feeling foreign. You wake up one day and realize that your nervous system is calm, your mind clear, your heart steady. You're no longer waiting for the other shoe to drop. You're no longer haunted by the past. You start to trust yourself again, to make choices not out of fear, but from intuition. You find meaning in stillness, power in vulnerability, and beauty in simplicity.